Sarah sent me what she was going to read, and I almost decided to not preach because that's a sermon. Right? Thank you, Sarah. And yes, we all have gifts, Nikki, and you pointed me, ministry. You are all the ministers. I happen to be your pastor, which gives me some shepherding responsibilities, but we wouldn't be church without you. And we wouldn't be a Christian body without you. That's what makes it. Would you pray with me a moment? Oh, gracious God, continue to shatter our expectations of who you are and where you are and how you move us and how you shape us and how you comfort us and challenge us and equip us to follow the way of grace and compassion and forgiveness and reconciliation that seems so counterintuitive to the world in which we live. We need to be transformed each and every moment, and this opportunity to worship you is a way to be strengthened and transformed so that we know what is really important in life. Enable my words and my thoughts and our collective meditation bring glory to you and new vision for ministry. In the name and in the Spirit of Jesus, we pray and say together, Amen. So for those of you keeping score, this is week 8 in the series of living outside my own little world. Outside my own little world, and this week it's I want to be reaching out, and just as a reminder, I love that the visuals continue to astound, support, and open the theme for the day. As I've mentioned in previous weeks, our primary resource is Dr. Marcia McPhee and the Worship Design Studio. I attended a workshop last weekend. I told you a little bit about a committee on ministry that makes rules for how ministers should conduct themselves, and one of them was, don't forget to credit people when you're borrowing things, because plagiarism is just as real in the church as it is anywhere else. So I'm borrowing and adapting. I want to be reaching out, and here's the sort of that visual with this contrast of living in my own little world, kind of isolated, or living in a world where there's more than one. And I just love this quote, never look down on somebody unless you're helping them up. Boy, that I could stop right there, and that'd be a good sermon. But you pay me money to come up with some other things, so I'm gonna keep going. We used the metaphor of the body from Paul's theology 2 weeks ago when we read from his letter to the Romans. Interesting that to the Corinthians, and it's interesting that this week it's from the Romans. So clearly Paul is trying to explain to that early church how it is that we are connected by the love of God that was revealed in Jesus, how it is that we are knit together, how it is that we are individuals and yet one body. I thought this picture was kind of funny, and this was when the ear can't say to the nose, I don't need you, or the foot can't say to the eye, I have no need of you. But today, what Paul was emphasizing in Romans, in addition to the fact that we're all essential to the body, is that we all have particular gifts that are given to us by the grace of God. And just like with the body, sometimes it's tempting to give a preference to one part of the body or not. Just like in the life of the church, sometimes we'll say the minister is the one who really has the ministry and we just help. We're all called. I have some jobs to do, and they're particular, and they're called out. That's what ordination means, called out for particular tasks, teaching, preaching, and administering the sacraments. But let's face it, there's a whole lot more to ministry than that. Many gifts, even the gift of those who are willing to open and close the building. If you are on the open and close schedule, would you stand up if you open and close the building? Okay. Thank you. That may be one of the least acknowledged talents, and yet it's so nice to come in and have the door open, right? I think for my first 6 months here, I was the first one here every time, and I'd think, okay, the door's going to be open. Wait, such a wonderful image, isn't it? Can't even get in the door. You can get in the door when you come. Many gifts. And together they make us stronger. I almost put the quote up here from Aristotle that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which is another way of saying it. But my wife is a reminder that I'm the king of stating the obvious. So I thought that I would put this up. We are more powerful together. We can get more done. We can be more who God imagines us to be when we are together. Can I get a witness on that? So reaching out and connection, we are talking this week about the pillar of community in the life of our church. And what I loved about Sarah's words and her story is that, and it kind of is built on the foundation of the internal community that welcomed her and Melissa and her family. And that is so critical. I found myself, as I read her words and then heard them again, of the times when my family had been nurtured by this internal community. I want you to pause just for a minute and think about a time when this community provided you something essential that you needed at the time when you needed it. It's the hallmark of Christian community to be loving and caring, be an agape community. That's the kind of community that might cut the piece of chocolate in an unequal piece and then actually delight in the other person having the bigger piece. Counterintuitive. So there's definitely an internal component to our community. We've experienced the power of that. But there's also an external community to which we're called to serve. And I'm a firm believer that if there is not a caring concern at the core internally, it's almost impossible to serve the larger community. Now, you can get it done, but typically what happens is churches get tired and worn out and burned out if there isn't something at the core that's feeding them. I had a terrific comment and compliment from someone recently who said, this church is really alive and there's so much happening, we don't want to miss anything. That is a good sign. That means Spirit is here. It's not just our work. We are working together with Spirit in our midst. So one of the things that I think helped revitalize this congregation is several years ago, a group got together to work on a strategic plan. And strategic plans had been done in this church in previous years, but they didn't necessarily take traction. And there were some skeptics who back in 2013 said, we're going to go through, they didn't say this out loud, just to me, we're going to go through all this work, and we're going to create all these wonderful documents, and we're going to put them in a file, and then 6 months later, nobody's going to remember what we did. So why spend all that energy doing something that isn't going to change anything? Because we might say all these wonderful things, but nothing happens. Hey, something happened 5 years ago because we decided clearly what our priorities were and who we were going to serve. And it's an absolute fact in congregational studies. When churches get to the place where they only focus on the internal community, they die. It's when they focus on internal community and see it as an opportunity to expand to the larger community. And several important ministry efforts have happened as a result, I believe, of that strategic plan. The other thing that's almost universally true in congregational studies is churches that are more than 25 years old the original vision and purpose has been forgotten. So it's important to reclaim a vision and reclaim priorities and reclaim who it is that we're going to be reaching out to. Because we know we can't reach out to everybody or we won't be any good to anybody. Can I get some agreement on that? So 5 years ago, we used this book called Discerning Your Congregation's Future, a Strategic and Spiritual Approach. I just want to underscore 3 words: discerning and strategic and spiritual. There are lots of secular ways of looking at how organizations should run, but none of them start with the question of discernment. That is, what is it that God is asking us to do in this time and in this place, and how do we understand it? And this group of people is going to be called out on your behalf to serve as a strategic planning committee to envision what we might do in the next 5 years or so. And I think I saw Sarah Ellers come in. Sarah, is that your kitty? That's one of your kitties. So this is Heather and Paige and Mac and Mark and Kathy and Liz and Derb and Sarah. Because I didn't have a picture of Sarah. But I knew that she would know who this was, and that's probably really what counted. What is discernment anyway? Yeah, how do we understand and follow the will of God? Oh, $64,000 question. Lots of us think, yeah, I don't know how we do that. I'll tell you one thing, typically one person can't do it. And it has to be, well, actually, the etymology makes a lot of sense. Discernment from a Greek word, to sift through. Some of you might have done discernment processes around any whole host of things, like do I need to look for a different job, or what do I do about some significant issue? In discernment, typically what happens is we do some soul searching, we're kind of connected, but we find out from other people how it is that they perceive our place in this decision. Can it make sense? Been kind of through this before? So the critical thing is to ask ourselves, what is it that we can see or know that is right in front of us? And can we see from God's perspective? This is the tricky part. Because we know that there are people who have articulated clear visions in the life of human history who have led people down the path of destruction as opposed to life. Right? So God's perspective is, what is going to affirm life? What is going to build this agape community where we actually celebrate the well-being of other people? It's a process of uncovering a decision rather than making it. It's not the same thing as consensus building, but it takes consensus. It's not the same thing as a political decision, but it takes into consideration the various dimensions in life of our church. Discernment is really challenging, and that's why oftentimes we skip over it and just get to work. When I worked with this committee 5 years ago, I kept saying, hold it. How does this fit with our mission? What's God thinking about this? The Spirit prays with us for sighs too deep for human words and is willing to lead us if we pay attention. We have to listen to the whole body. We have to keep our ego in check. That's one of the things discernment does. I've been in some churches where people want their pastor to just tell them what their vision is. they might do it for a while to make her happy, but it isn't really grassroots. It isn't really their vision. That's what this whole thing's about. But it needs prayerful support. Discernment can't happen, won't happen without prayer. And I know enough people in the United Church of Christ will say, David, I don't have the vaguest idea how to pray. Well, there's a great time to begin some experiments with prayer, especially when we're trying to find discernment for where God would have us be in the next 5 years. Otherwise, have you ever noticed that if you don't aim at a target, you'll miss it every time? We might as well aim at something. Otherwise, we know we're going to fail. There are basically two ways to pray. One is the kind of prayer that we do and during prayers of the people, and we'll do it a little bit later, is petitions, articulation of I'm concerned about this person, or I'm concerned about this issue, or I am so grateful that I'm celebrating an anniversary or a birthday, or I've had time with my family, or some kind of reconciliation has happened. It's when we're saying something to God. We're typically more comfortable with that as opposed to listening for what God might be saying to us. And a lot of us, because of our worry about hubris and those religious people who talk about they know what God is telling them to do, are a little bit worried that, I'm not sure I want to even believe that God might be saying something to me, because what if I'm hearing wrong? What if it isn't God? That's what discernment is. You do it in community. Otherwise, it's egos pulling us in all different directions. Wait a minute. How am I doing? Oh well. Yesterday, I was practicing the kind of prayer that is listening in meditation and centering prayer. And I fall in and out of this. I have times in my life where I'm good at it, and every day I'm doing my centering prayer, and I think, wow, why can't I sustain this? This really helps me stay grounded. I'm less anxious during the day. I feel like I'm really called to do something. If I mess something up, it doesn't kind of kill me. But, sisters and brothers, I confess that I sort of wander away from it. So yesterday at the library, I decided to do centering prayer. And what I ask myself when I begin is, what does my soul need? And I can tell you that as I just concentrated on my breath, it came to me that what I needed was some sense that I was not doing this by myself. Because I, quite frankly, am getting tired of feeling like we live in such a berserk world. I kind of don't want to be outside my own little world. Can I get a witness on that? Oh, ugly. Let's just go hide in our bubble someplace. So I was praying. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be alone. This is too heavy. I need help. Help. Lightness. And all of a sudden I had an image of myself floating in the water. My eyes were closed. Floating in the water, and I'm not very good at floating. I sink pretty rapidly. But I was floating. I was just kind of floating in the water, and all of a sudden, this image of Jesus floated kind of over like a piece of driftwood and held out hand and said, I've got your back. You know, psychologists could look at that and think maybe wishful thinking. Maybe. But it felt like it came from outside of myself to reassure me that it's going to be okay. I got you. That's what we're about in this community, knowing that God's saying, I got you. I got you. So here are the prayers Experiment with that meditation kind of prayer, just being quiet. See if you can actually be quiet for 5 minutes and focus on one word, the word that you need. You might need grace. You might need serenity. You might need peace. You might need love. You might need reconciliation. You might need sanity. Who knows? Let God show you. And if you're just quiet, it's amazing what will happen. We don't get quiet very often. It's a great discipline. So, these are the other kind of prayers, the kinds that we think about and offer up to God. These are the questions that can guide your prayer life. How's God calling us to be the church over the next 5 years? Is Bethel ready for a different mission or a new mission or expanded mission? And how could Bethel benefit from a review of our current strategic plan? What are the challenges of discernment? Might mean we change some things. And am I content the way church is? That's the most important question. Because if we're all like, hey, it's good, we may not have to discern anything because nothing's missing. Do you have a spiritual hunger that you wish Bethel would address? And I dream of a church, fill in the blank. This is our next to the last opportunity to use our vision board and to build on our vision board. And you should have something in your bulletin that looks like a cartoon character who's going to be saying something. And they're a little hard to see, but it should be on the right-hand side of your bulletin as you open it. I'd like you to just think for a minute about, I dream of a church, and fill in the blank. Because that's a really key question in discernment. I asked Owen to prepare this song, which is a description and lyrics about I dream of a church that. So you may find that you know exactly what you want to write down. Maybe you've already written it down. And I invite you to bring it forward. Nancy will help you put it on the board if you need help. But you may want to listen to the song. It might help prompt you. So this is the good news, that God's love is for all of us. And God gives us the brain and the heart to imagine what might be possible. Amen.
I dream of a church where everyone is welcome. I of a place we all can call home.